women like Melanie are not going away, and women like me are not going away either. So we will continue to be advocates and champions for the sector. What I wanted to do in my time this morning is really to give you a little bit of the bigger picture, where I think the kind of political, social, economic influences are, why we've come to the place that we're at now, and where I think we ought to be going, and where I think we will be going in the years to come as we develop on this agenda. I suppose this journey for me started about 30 years ago. My background into politics was very much third sector, local organisations, nascent social enterprises even then, people trying to do their work, but in the way that they did their work, seeking to make a real difference to the communities in which they lived and worked and brought up their families. And that was absolutely my route, first of all into local politics and then later on into national politics as well. Now, there are not that many members of Parliament who've actually come up in that way these days, and one of my great regrets is that the number of MPs of all political parties who actually have never done anything else other than politics. And I think the frustration of that sometimes is that you find yourself having the same conversation again and again and again with people who don't actually get either social enterprise, social value, social investment, that whole business around the social economy. And I think I'll know one of my signs of success is when I start to talk about these issues and somebody says, you don't need to go through all that, Hazel. Actually, I absolutely know all that. What I want to talk about is the practicalities, how we're going to develop, how we're going to get bigger, how we're going to make more impact. So I suppose that's my strategic goal here. But the latest kind of phase, I suppose, of my life that has made me absolutely immersed in this is, first of all, when I was Secretary of State, I did the first cross-government social enterprise strategy. And that was to say to every single government department, what are you doing to try and make extra social impact, to work with big and small social enterprises, to bring the public sector, the private sector and the third sector together to really kind of triple the impact that we can make. And I have to say the reaction was variable, shall we say. I've been banging on about this ever since I got into Parliament. When I was a health minister, I talked about social enterprise 15, 16 years ago. When I was police minister, I did my best to get the kind of social impact in all of that. And when I was communities minister, it was an absolute passion. But I have to say this to you, that the civil service traditionally, they understand the public sector, they understand the private sector, but they have very rarely understood the spectrum of different organisations that are a vibrant part of our economy, but that don't fall neatly into that kind of divide. I am encouraged now, because I think more of the system inside government is beginning to get this. More of the system inside local government certainly is. I think the biggest challenge is with central government at the moment still. But it's not as if you're having a kind of virgin conversation anymore. You are actually having a conversation where people connect. You're not talking a completely foreign language. They've got a lexicon, they've got a glossary, they've got a phrase book. So I do think that we're making some progress. But if you remember a few years ago, I suppose 3 years ago, my leader made a speech about responsible capitalism. And really that was the catalyst for me here. I thought the theme was absolutely spot on. I thought the way in which it was interpreted and put across in some ways was actually deeply damaging. And I think the idea that capitalism was about producers and predators, good and bad, all of that kind of anti-business rhetoric certainly did not strike a chord with me. I've always believed in my politics that we need good, successful businesses based on good values that can create wealth, create jobs, can be the drivers for regeneration. But that we also need social organisations and we need the public sector working together to bring the different values that they can bring. So I suppose I was quite angry, not at Ed's speech, but the way in which it was portrayed as certainly putting my party into an anti-business space. But often when you get angry, the best thing to do is to do something. So I set up a group entirely on my own initiative called Doing Good is Good Business. Because I absolutely believed that if you do the right thing, then you can get a competitive advantage, not in a cynical way, but actually if your business is based on really good values, the way in which you operate, the policies you have, the way in which you employ people, the way that you do your production can actually give you that competitive advantage. And the purpose of doing this was really to explore, I suppose particularly with the private sector, but with the aid of social enterprise and local authorities, how can you move from traditional corporate social responsibility about painting the primary school or going in and doing some charitable work, all of which is fine, but how do you move in a big strategic way to use your mainstream business model to do good? And that can be through procurement, it can be through your recruitment decisions, your HR department, your product development, your marketing, every bit of your mainstream business. And that actually makes it easier for business because you're doing that anyway. But taking a different perspective about each component part of your business and saying, how do we make a double impact? How, by the way in which we do our business, do we make a difference to our local communities? How do we make a difference to the national economy? And how do we get that massive impact? And it seemed to me that when we were facing a period of austerity, the like of which we haven't known for many, many years, then this agenda was perfectly timed to make a really big impact. Because I set up the system of Total Place when I was Secretary of State, trying to bring together education, health, economic regeneration budgets, policing budgets, putting them all in the same place. I knew the only way that we would survive this period of austerity was if people thought more creatively, they pooled their budgets, they brought staff together, they co-located people, they were prepared to do things that they weren't ever prepared to do. And if there's one bonus from this period of austerity, it is that people are now prepared to contemplate working in ways that they never would have thought of before. Collaboration, partnerships. Partnership used to be described as, I think, people basically who detested each other prepared to work together in pursuit of funding, which was probably the worst definition of partnership that I have ever heard. But it was true in many cases. And I think, again, we've moved on from that now, where there is a genuine willingness for the public, the private and the third sector to collaborate together and recognise that we can actually all learn from each other. And again, I suppose part of my holy grail, when I know that we will have succeeded, is where we don't have those deep and sharp divisions between people, where every business in this country, and indeed across the world, because this is a global movement, we are well ahead in this country, but actually this is a global movement, where every business is a social business, and where it has social values and a social mission at the heart of what it does. And there's a hard-headed business case for wanting to do that. The evidence base now around the recruitment of the best talent in this country is absolutely clear. This generation, they call it the millennia generation, when they're asked what they think the purpose of business is. In the past, they would have said to make money. Perhaps the best of them would have said to create jobs. Some of them would have said to develop shareholder value. This time, in the latest survey, that millennia generation has said the purpose of business is to improve society. Now, I think that is absolutely amazing. I think it gives me incredible hope for our country that the next generation of young people coming through have that view of business. But what that means for business is that I suppose the first question might still be, to new recruits, the best, the brightest talent. What's the package like? What are the holidays? What's the pay? But absolutely on a par with that is, what are your values to an employer? What do you stand for? How do you work? How do you treat your employees? How do you develop your products? What are your trading conditions like in the countries where you operate? Because those young people, this generation, they want to go home at night and they want to be proud of who they work for, and they want to talk to their friends and their families, and they want to have that sense of excitement and impact that they can make. So for me, the group that I set up was called Doing Good is Good Business. It's not complicated. It's 5 words. I'm a politician. If you can't get your message in 5 words, then you're not worthy of being called a politician. And I think that this is, I think it's a movement. I really do believe that it is a movement changing things. And it's also driven by the fact that we've had the financial crisis, that people have lost trust in big business, they've lost trust in politicians, much of that, no doubt, our own fault. They've lost trust in the press because of all the kind of hacking stuff, everything else. The big institutions that go to make up our society are under tremendous pressure from a lack of confidence and a lack of trust from the public. And when you've got that kind of general atmosphere, in my view, you have to do something pretty bold to get beyond it. And I think that this agenda is a bold agenda. It is about people who traditionally might have been seen as just about caring about the bottom line, are prepared to look at other issues. And it makes that kind of leap that I think genuinely can begin to restore the trust between people, between business, between politicians, between the organisations that we work for. So it was from that, really, that I decided to work very, very closely with Chris White, who's a West Midlands MP. He's a lovely man. You wouldn't mind me saying he's only about 5'2". I'm 4'11". Chris and I can literally see eye to eye, as well as seeing eye to eye on this issue. I've worked for the last 5 years completely cross-party. because there's no point if you're in opposition simply shouting at the other side. You won't get anything done. And therefore, I've worked with Conservative ministers, I've worked with Conservative MPs, I've worked with Liberal Democrats. I don't care what it takes, as long as we make progress on this agenda. And Chris and I came together. He was incredibly lucky. He was a brand new MP, completely brand new. And he drew number 1 in the private member's ballot. You know, that is like gold dust. He must have had a kind of shining star the day that he went in the raffle for the private member's bill. I've been there nearly 20 years. I've never come in the first 10 for a private member's bill. And you're only likely to be able to make law, probably realistically, if you're in the first maybe 3. And then not always the case. So Chris and I had a discussion, and because he knew that I'd cared about social enterprise for 30 years, that I'd done a lot in my ministerial role, and I had some experience of parliamentary procedure, we agreed to work together on this with Social Enterprise UK, a whole range of different organisations. And private members' bills are like premature babies. You know, you have to kind of nurture them, look after them, keep them warm and clothed and fed, and all it takes is one, I was going to say idiot backbencher. That's probably not the right phrase. But one backbencher who's got a particular bee in his or her bonnet to stand up in the House of Commons as you're taking your bill through and simply to shout, object, and the whole bill will fall. No matter how far you've got, no matter how much work you've done. And because it's not government legislation, it means you've got to draft, you've got to do amendments, you've got to do the whole process without very much support from officials. You don't have a civil service machine. You know, if you're a minister, you've got a whole machine there helping you take your bill through. So basically, it was just me and Chris. We had some opponents on the far right, I would say, who were kind of libertarian capitalists, and they said that this would be a drag on the free market, putting social clauses into contracts. Goodness me, this is the days of, you know, the loony left in Lambeth and all of that. And then we had some opponents that I would put on my far left who said that social enterprise is privatisation by the back door, the only good service is a completely monolithic public service. Well, that's never where I've been in my politics. So Chris and I thought, if we've got opponents over there and we've got opponents over there, we're actually probably in the right place. And it made us even more determined to get this bill through. We had the support of Nick Hurd, who was the Cabinet Office Minister then, who in my view was the best Cabinet Office Minister I have seen for many, many years. He absolutely got this sector. He never should have been reshuffled, and we would actually be making more progress now, I think, if Nick had remained in place. So hopefully, well, I'm not saying hopefully after the election, because I don't want them to be in government, but if they are in government, then hopefully Nick will be restored to his place, because I think that would make a really, really big difference. And we managed to get the bill through, all of its phases, which is very, very unusual. But I would just say this, getting a piece of legislation through in the House of Commons is but the first step on any big major cultural change programme, and that's what I view this agenda as, a big major cultural change programme. And my experience is that that takes you at least 3 years. When I brought neighbourhood policing into this country when I was the police minister, we started off trying to change a whole culture, changing the police service from turning up with its red lights on, its blue lights on, to an incident, sorting it out, going back to the police station, into a whole new system built on relationships, long-term policing, same people in the same place for 3 years, etc. And that, when I first proposed that, you know, a system built on relationships, the chief constables thought that I was a strange woman from Relate Marriage Guidance. What they were about was locking up villains and catching the bad guys and putting them in prison, and that was it. 3 years later, after a major cultural change programme, the chief constables came back to me and said, do you know, Minister, this neighbourhood policing system, it's fantastic. It's helping us reduce robberies, burglaries, etc. And what I learned from that is that if you really want to change a system, and this is a whole system, you have your legislation, you then need your early adopters, so you need your enthusiasts in the public and the private sector, and the companies you've got here today, Keir, Waits, Mears, Carillion, all of those people, I would class you as early adopters who see this, you're ahead of the game, that's absolutely where you want to be. There are a number of local authorities now who are early adopters, Birmingham, Solihull, Salford, Manchester, Suffolk, Richmond, all different political shades and stripes who absolutely get this, see this as a way of getting better value for money, more creative commissioning, more impact out there, getting their young people jobs who would never have had the chance to get a job. So you've got your early adopters. You then need to give people a toolkit of practical ways in which they can implement this, and hopefully in the social value review there are some best practice case studies, there are some tools in there to be able to do the job, there's some stuff about measurement as well, which is absolutely key, and I'll say a word about that. But most of all, you have to give people a business case as to why they should want to do this. You know, this is not a charity. reality. And this is about doing good is good business, and therefore you have to begin to see the results. And that's what people are now saying to me, that when they're in competitive dialogue with local authorities in procurement processes, it's tremendously varied. You go to some local authorities and they absolutely get it. They're starting at 15-20% social value, and you're straight into that kind of dialogue. How can you show, if you want to build a new campus, if you want to build a new housing estate, how are you going to exhibit that social value? But you go to other places and they've hardly ever heard of it, and you're back to where I said at the beginning, you're starting a virgin conversation with people, and that is so irritating. So the things that I wanted to get out of the review, which was Lord Young's review, and Lord Young, bless him, was Mrs. Thatcher's business advisor quite some time ago. And when I first walked into his room, Chris and I were on the review, and somebody from small businesses and somebody from the third sector. So it's quite a small group of us. And when we walked into his room in number 10, he said to me, Hazel, he said, I'm a small business advocate. I've spent the last 3 years getting rid of PQQs, ITTs, getting the bureaucracy out of small business. I don't know anything about social enterprise. I'm a skeptic. Tell me, what do you want? So I thought, we've got about 2 months here to get this review through. We're on an uphill kind of struggle. So I just thought, from my experience, let's see if we can get 3 things out of it, because we're not going to get new legislation. It was only published just before the election. There's no way we're going to get that. So the 3 things that I wanted to get out of it were, first of all, raising awareness, not just around local government, because we've now got 50, 60 local authorities. That will happen. My big target is central government. I think central government are absolutely appalling on this agenda. They've signed up and ticked the box that they've changed their procurement rules, and they're doing social, economic and environmental impact. No, they're not. If you look at the NHS, they are doing it in the trusts. The trusts who are committed, Bart's massive reconfiguration programme in London, the biggest building programme the NHS has ever done, had social value clauses in it. But the centre of the NHS, through its procurement, is not doing it. You look at the MOD, they're doing some good stuff around the management of their estates. There's a social enterprise called Landmark, which manages quite a lot of the MOD estate now. 50% of the people employed on managing the MOD estate are now former veterans. Fantastic. People coming back from Afghanistan who cannot get a job, can't get resettled, because they're working in a social enterprise, they're helping to maintain the MOD estates. What's not to like about that? That is a win-win-win for everyone. But there are few and far between these examples. What's the Department for Transport doing? What's DWP are not bad on this agenda, actually. But there's this is billions of pounds worth of procurement and construction. And I think the big kind of challenge is to get into central government, because also that's about leadership. If central government are doing it, the message then through the whole system is that not only is this legitimate, actually it's something we positively want to do, and that's an incredibly powerful leadership message. So what we managed to get in the review is, first of all, obviously raising awareness in the case studies, but secondly, that there will be a steering group set up in each central government department with a responsibility to report back on what it is doing in relation to social value. Now, if that is driven by a powerful minister who's got a bit of clout, and I would prefer it to be a Secretary of State who can walk into Cabinet and say, right, we want a report from every single Cabinet Minister on what are you doing in your department to push the social value agenda, then it would happen. It only takes 5 minutes of a Prime Minister's time to say to his ministers, I want that report, and it will happen. But it's getting that drive into the system. One of the things I suggested, perhaps a bit mischievously, to Margaret Hodge, and I don't know whether she will be the chair of the PAC after the election, but if the Public Accounts Committee, which is the scariest place for a permanent secretary ever to be called in front of, if they were to announce an inquiry into the implementation of the Social Value Act across government, then those permanent secretaries, I'll tell you, they would have to sit up, take notice, get things going, get programmes going in their department. So fingers crossed, whoever's the chair of the PAC, then we will make that happen. I am determined. And the third thing I wanted to do was to make sure that there was some stuff around measurement and metrics, because everybody is now saying to me, in the public sector, the private sector, the third sector, social enterprise, we want a level playing field. If we're going to do this, we want some credit for doing it, and we want to be able to measure it. There's about 1,200 different measurement systems out there. It's ridiculous. I mean, I'm all in favour of letting 1,000 flowers bloom, but at some point you've got to draw that, stretch the analogy, draw that bouquet together into something that smells nice and looks nice and is very presentable and does the job. So what we've got in the review is a commitment over the next 9 months to draw up a framework of principles for measurement. And I was, that's what I wanted. I didn't want something that's completely prescriptive, because actually this is about a creative agenda, and I wanted people still to be able to create, but within a fairly clear framework. What are the principles that we're going to measure? Which are the ones that we're going to take into account in the tendering process, in allocating those contracts? And then at least people know they've got some clarity about what they're trying to do. And that brings me back to my cultural change programme. Once you've got a business case and people have got clarity about what they're doing, then you can put some incentives in the system through getting the contracts, big contracts, that people are able to operate. And then what you find is that you'll then get the tail end Charlies, if you like, who weren't the early adopters, saying, this is a mainstream agenda, I better get on board, and then you have actually changed the system. And I think that is the prize, because as long as this remains a niche activity, as long as it remains, that's the social enterprise sector, and they're the really lovely people who've got hearts and they care, and if it hasn't infected the mainstream business model, if it hasn't infected capitalism and made us have a more responsible kind of capitalist system, we won't have achieved the vision that I think that we all share on this agenda, which is to change the system for the long term. And I think that, in politics, in business, in communities as well, that the prize is that you don't have to keep going over this territory again and again and again, because it becomes business as usual. And I just want to finish really with 3 very quick examples. Ian, I was delighted to see your presentation, and I know that you're putting social value clauses, and you already do put social value clauses in your construction. It made me think, is it just universities that have got lots of money? Because in the last 3 weeks, I've been to 3 universities, and they're all on this agenda, which is fantastic news, because again, it's about leadership, thought leadership. You're not doing this just out of the goodness of your heart. You're doing it because you'll get a better deal. But you are a lovely person as well, so you're doing it out of the goodness of your heart. But on Tuesday this week, I was at Manchester University, as ever, because they're big. They've got £1 billion to spend over the next 8 years. £1 billion of capital expenditure. They, in a really interesting way, have gone out for a framework contract for 3 contractors. There'll only be 3 contractors in this framework, which is to some extent a risk on their part, because they've not got a lot of people to play off against each other, but they're going to have an 8-year relationship with 3 contractors to spend £1 billion. Wow. And they're going to put social value in all of that procurement and construction, and they get it. They're seeking some help and advice from people who've been down this track, but they absolutely get it, and they're committed to doing it. They're backed by Manchester City Council again, who absolutely get this. And I'll tell you, you get £1 billion spend with 3 contractors with an 8-year relationship, you can change the lives of the people in those communities where they operate. Because it's very difficult to change people's lives in 12 months. It's difficult to do it in 2 years. You've got an 8-year relationship, then you can make a fabulous difference. The second example I wanted to give you is right at the other end of the spectrum, really, and that is, how do you do it? And I think now that in the social sector, there is more capacity than I have ever known in the history of the sector to be able to help large companies deliver this. So instead of the small companies and the social enterprises being competitors, they are absolutely ripe for collaboration and getting into your supply chain, giving you the creativity, the agility, the innovation that sometimes big companies don't have, the challenge and the spark that they can bring. And one of the best ones I know, I've known them 10 years, they're from Salford, so they would be my favourite, but they're called Beef4Box. And I don't know if some of you have heard of them. I really hope you have, and if you haven't, then you will. They're a social enterprise run by a woman in construction, which is a rare occurrence, but she's an amazing woman. And basically she started off in a really, really small way, taking people from very difficult backgrounds, people who'd had drug problems, who were homeless, who hadn't worked for a long, long time, who was far away from the labour market as you can possibly imagine. And she took them on to refurbish houses that had been trashed by former tenants, multi-skilled qualifications, level 2, level 3 and level 4, absolutely ambitious for some of the poorest and most challenged people in our community. She's been going now for many, many years. She's presented to more government ministers than I can shake a stick at, because she is so impressive. And what she's got is the normal kind of proportion, I think, in construction is 1 apprentice for every £1 million of spend. What Aidem's been able to achieve is 13 apprentices for every £1 million of spend. Now, if that's not ambitious, and these are apprentices from the most challenged background you can ever imagine, 93% of them, and she's been operating now for nearly 10 years, 93% of them are still employed. The vast majority now in Beaverbox, which has grown, has got franchises in Liverpool, Salford, Birmingham, right across the country. So retention rate, absolutely fantastic. But you know what she's done? This is the IP, right, of a small organisation. And she's the first person who's got a building contract, a JCT building contract, where social impact has the same priority as price, quality and performance. And she has been working for the last couple of years with some very bright lawyers to change that JCT contract, but you can only do it, and she says to me, you can only do it if the client and the contractor are committed to social value. But where the client and the contractor are committed, then you can do amazing things, because it's a whole systems change. It's not one of you pulling this way and one of you pulling that way, somebody trying to maximise profits, somebody trying to maximise social impact. You're actually working as a whole organisation. You've got commissioners and providers in the same contractual framework, and I think it's incredibly exciting. If you look at some of the new contracts that are now emerging around alliance contracting, which again is a legal framework that drives collaboration rather than competition, this is a big new world. My final example, very quickly, and then I will sit down, is one that I heard very recently, and it's Manchester City Football Club. Who would have thought of a major football club as being totally committed to social value? When they built the Etihad Stadium in East Manchester, 80% of their procurement for the whole project was within the M60 corridor, and 84% of the jobs went to people in East Manchester. If any of you knew about East Manchester, you think of the worst place in Wolverhampton, then East Manchester can probably give you a run for your money in terms of lack of education, dereliction, empty sites, terrible land, everything else. And they did it, and they just set out, and they just did it. They didn't need any permission. They just decided it was the right thing to do. Manchester City Football Club have always been a community-based football club since 1888 when they first started. And it was basically to keep young lads out of jail because they had nothing better to do. So for God's sake, get them playing football. They've just sent a team out to New York to build a similar stadium, and they're operating now. They've got plans to do a similar project in 8 venues across the world. Singapore, the Middle East, Abu Dhabi, you name it. Now, if that's not a movement that has got legs, sometimes I wake myself up in the middle of the night and I think, Hazel, have you dreamt all this up? Is it just a kind of flight of fancy? But if you look at the bits of the jigsaw now, it's not just about legislation, the EU procurement rules, the politics around it. Whoever wins the election in the next couple of weeks, this is not going away. The need to have a more responsible way of doing our business, to draw on the innovation of the third sector, to use all our skills and talents together has never been more timely and never been more salient. And therefore I think that this is an agenda that's got traction, it's got momentum, it's got some great people in construction who are taking this forward in a real tangible way, so that it's not fluffy talk, it's actually delivering on the ground. I think it's incredibly powerful. I'm delighted to be associated with it. Thank you.